there is another piece to the populist story which is less formal, but no less important. And it goes to the heart of the practical meaning of popular sovereignty, the rule of the people. Who are the people? When we say we the people, what do we mean? We didn't always mean we all the people, did we? Right? You know, we the white people, we the male people, at some point early in our history, we the property owning people, etc. And the democratization of the United States has taken the form of the steady expansion of the perimeter of the people, and so it comes closer and closer to corresponding to the people as a totality. As you look at populist movements everywhere, what you see is that when they say the people should rule, they don't mean all of the people. They always mean some of the people. The people who look like us, the people who speak the same language as their first language, you know, people of the same ethnicity, people of the same religion, people who have been in the country for a long time as opposed to these newcomers. The idea of the people in the hands of the populists is always partial and exclusionary. Another way of putting this is that populism tends towards an ideal of homogeneity. One single popular will of one homogeneous people. And that's the gravamen of my deep doubts about populism. My sense it's a threat, because populism is here and pluralism is here. In reality and in practice, you can have one or the other. Populism is a threat to liberal democracy because populism is opposed to pluralism, and modern liberal democracy is inherently pluralistic. That's the case I want to make in one sentence. Now, why is this happening? I spend a lot of time in the book trying to get my mind around it, and I have to say that in the 5-year journey that led me to this book, I have changed my thinking on more than one occasion. So maybe a little bit of intellectual autobiography would be useful. I wrote my first article on the rise of populism in 2013, and I was convinced at the time that it was principally an economic phenomenon, that what you saw in Europe and increasingly elsewhere was the breakdown of the post-war social contract between the people and governing elites. Governing elites would deliver peace and prosperity and social order, and the people would deliver deference to elites in return. And when the elites stopped performing their side of the bargain, all bets were off, and the people began to withdraw their consent from this contract. And of course, economic stagnation, the Great Recession, the difficulty that governments throughout the West had in coming up with effective responses to the Great Recession, the implementation of austerity at the worst possible time. I mean, you all know that story. After 2015, I began to broaden my understanding of the populist phenomenon because things were going on after 2015 that simply didn't fit into the economic box very comfortably. In my judgment, one of the hinge moments in this story was German Chancellor Angela Merkel's decision, an honorable decision, a noble decision, but an ill-judged decision to open Germany's gates to more than 1 million refugees from the Middle East and to some extent North Africa as well. That was the decision that created the backlash that elevated Hungary's Viktor Orban into a European folk hero, and which sparked the rise of the AfD in Germany and in many other places, and parallel parties in many other places as well. So in addition to economics, we have immigration, but you have to understand immigration as a cultural phenomenon, or you have to understand the cultural interpretation of the fact of immigration. Because immigration in the minds of skeptics is kind of a trifecta of horrors. There's the economic dimension. They're coming to take our jobs, and even if we keep our jobs, they suppress our wages. The Polish plumbers are driving down the wages of good old British plumbers, which to some extent, to be fair, they did. In addition to that, they come demanding our social services, they're clogging the healthcare system, and this is why the National Health Service in the UK and freedom of immigration from the rest of Europe became intertwined as a campaign issue. And why it was argued that if we get out of the UK, we can take 350 million euros a week and redirect them to the NHS. A totally bogus figure, but it had great symbolic power, right? The EU is responsible for undermining social services in Britain. There's also a security dimension to immigration, both ordinary crime and, when in the case of immigration from the Middle East and elsewhere, the fear of terrorism as well. But third and finally is a cultural dimension to immigration. The fear that immigration is transforming the country not only quantitatively, but also qualitatively. The country is turning into something I don't recognize. And there are versions of this proposition throughout the West. I feel like a stranger in my own country. Focus groups are turning up versions of that wherever we look. And so the force of the proposition, take our country back, you have to complete the sentence. Take our country back from what? From whom? In the case of the United States, we slammed the immigration gates shut in 1924 and kept them shut for 41 years. During that period, first-generation immigrants as a share of the US population fell from about 15% to 4.7%. That's where it was when the Hart-Celler Bill was enacted in 1965. Guess where it is now? 25. It's at 14%. So it's basically where it was when the alarm bells rang in the late teens and early 20s of the previous century. And by the way, if we keep on going, according to a recent report from the Pew Research Center, we will be headed towards 20% by 2070 or so, but we're not there yet. So immigration is a huge part of the populist story.